Hello, everyone. I'm Ruben Santana, Director of IT at Proactive Worldwide, one of the world's leading marketing intelligence agencies based just outside of Chicago. And welcome to our webinar on maximizing competitive intelligence contributions, a strategy framework for proving value. This session is led by David Kalinowski, President and co-founder of Proactive, who is a 35-year CI veteran. During this webinar, you can post questions using the Q&A button. To protect the identities of those on the call, only David and myself will be able to view those questions. This session is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording within the next day or two. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you, Ruben. I want you all to imagine that you're a chef and you're whipping up the perfect dish. You have sourced the finest ingredients, mastered your technique, and plated it like a piece of art. You step back, you admire your masterpiece, and you confidently send it out. But here's the kicker. You don't get to decide if it's a hit. That's up to the diner. And here's the twist. You don't even know what they want. Maybe they want some extra cilantro or they want some extra spice. If I go into a restaurant and I order a steak, the chef doesn't come out at the end and say, hey, you loved that meal. I'll decide if that 6-ounce petite filet was worth $50, depending on temperature, seasoning, the ambiance, the service, whatever factors are most important to me. And the same is true for competitive intelligence. You can have and deliver the most insightful researched analysis, but if you don't really understand your stakeholders' mindset in terms of how they perceive value and what success would look like and how they're going to actually apply what you're getting to decision making, then really your work could be pushed aside like an overcooked steak. Well, today, folks, we're not just going to be cooking up some new insights. We're going to make sure they're very well seasoned to be able to ensure that you deliver what matters most. You know, folks, it's really interesting if you think about the constant element of, boy, if we could just show the value of CI, it would be great. I mean, that would be our holy grail right here, and everything would be fantastic. Well, let's address that today and see if being able to show the value of CI is indeed the holy grail. So, hello, everybody. I'm David Kalinowski. If you haven't met me before, let me give you a couple seconds about myself. And if you have, it's great to reconnect with several of you here. I have now spent a little bit north of 70,000 hours of my life in the competitive intelligence space. I started well before the internet even existed. We used to do work the old-fashioned way. You would call, request an annual report from the publicly held company, if they were public, that you were researching, wait 2 weeks for it to show up in the mail, flip to the back pages of the executives and start calling them, right? Very, very primary research driven. Well, things have evolved, a little bit since then, of course. But I'm proud of the fact that I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work with some of the largest, most respected companies in the world. We've done work in over 62 different countries as an organization, written a couple books on the topic as well. Really quick, just about our firm, if you're not as familiar with our organization, this is our 30th year in business. So I'm really proud of the fact that we have stood the test of time through some tough challenges throughout those couple of decades there. On the bottom right here, you see some of the things that we do: benchmarking, pricing analysis, ongoing monitoring, voice of customer type of work, and across a wide variety of industries. But let's get to the heart of why we're here today. Why do we have to show the ROI of CI? I mean, don't people know that we're great already, that we add all kinds of value? Well, not always. What's in it for us as CI practitioners is we really have to think about our reputation, the credibility, and when we can show and demonstrate the value of what we produce, it starts to help institutionalize CI more. And it's not just an afterthought. One thing I hate is when people reference CI as an expense, right? We're not an expense. We're an asset that should be on the balance sheet. And for your organization, it's key to be able to show the ROI on what we produce, because it allows them to really see how you can impact growth and how you can help to the organization to save and make money, or save and make time along the way, and ultimately to support their investment in building this intelligence capability. So we're going to address this topic a bit more here. I've referenced ROI a couple times. So what is that? Well, you look at these potential answers on screen here, and it could be really any of these. But for today's purposes, ROI, of course, is return on investment. Although I will say when I was in Ireland, maybe I was at risk for letter F there a little bit because I couldn't pour that Guinness the right way and when I went on the tour, so I kind of got scolded a little bit there, but maybe next time I'll get it right. Okay, here you go. Here's the secret. It's what y'all been waiting for. All you have to do is apply the arithmetic or the logarithmic method, and as long as the end outcome is greater than 0, that's a good thing. So that's it, everybody. I appreciate you joining here today, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. And I don't know what any of this stuff means. My youngest son's a software engineer, and so this probably makes sense to him. But I don't do any of this kind of math. I'm a pretty simple person, and I just apply the formula of benefits minus costs divided by costs. Now, as you think about those two, which is harder to identify? No, benefits, of course, right? We know our costs. We know our team and our staff headcount and hence their salaries. And we know how much we may pay if we work with an outside partner. We understand the cost of travel or conferences or training, databases you subscribe to. But the benefits that we get, that's where we struggle sometimes to be able to consistently share with leadership the value that we're bringing here. So first thing I want you to think about is what should we measure? What do we actually measure? And how do we know what to measure? I already see a quick question popping in saying, so what are some things to measure? Well, I'm going to share that in just a second. So great question. I think it's really important that you talk with your stakeholders. They're the only ones, just like in my opening story, they're the only ones that can really give you their unique sense of what matters to them on what to measure to determine the value, determine the success of that project, based on that particular project. So as you think about this, there's two kind of broad categories in which to evaluate in terms of potential metrics. You have a series of quantitative metrics, everything from win rates, if you're doing sales enablement type of intelligence, all the way to improving your net promoter score, to saving time, saving money, making money, enhancing the product life cycle, avoiding costs. Some of these things Jan Herring many years ago talked about in his measures of effectiveness. If you don't know Jan, what's wrong with you? No, just kidding. Jan is I kind of lovingly called the grandfather or godfather of CI. But some of this work was built on his work from a couple of decades ago as well. But we have to look at these quantitative metrics to understand what will resonate most with that stakeholder. And it will vary depending on the stakeholder and their role and what they're measured on. How do they get their bonus? But we can't dismiss the qualitative components. They're still incredibly valuable. So if you stimulated new thinking with the intelligence you provided, or maybe you fostered a conversation that nobody else has been raising because they were hesitant to, and you put it on the table now, and that creates decisions. That's fantastic. If you are teaching leadership something new, if you're helping them create more effective strategies. Ultimately, if you can help innovation or R&D develop new products because you understand what the customer's needs are or their unmet needs combined with the gaps in the market from your competitive research, even just boosting their confidence in the decision. Maybe they weren't very confident prior to your analysis about the decision, the $100 million investment they have to make, but afterwards they are now more confident. These are all very important elements to look at and to consider as you're thinking about knowing what to measure. So the first part of the framework that I'm going to be describing is you got to know what to measure. And you know what to measure by talking with your stakeholders right up front and understanding at the beginning of every project what it is specifically you're going to assess or want to measure to know whether or not what we're delivering will add value. Because then everything we deliver has to somehow link back to that metric. And if it doesn't, then why are we doing it? You are not in the nice to know business. You're not in the nice to know business. We can't just take projects as, hey, I'd like to know. Be nice to know this. That's not what we do as intelligence professionals, as you know. So now we know what to measure because the stakeholder told us what to measure. What do you do next? Well, you have to measure it, right? Just like if you get an annual performance review, right? You know the metrics you're measured against for your performance, but if your manager never actually measures it, then who cares? What's the point, right? So once we understand, now we have the metrics, we have to then assess the impact. I share this framework here that my friend Tim Powell created because I really like it. And I think as intelligence professionals, we're pretty good at the bottom rung. Right? We can acquire data, and certainly with AI related tools and outside partners, et cetera, we are able to handle that piece of it, right? We could process that data, and heck, we might even analyze it. But increasingly, the challenge for us is the top part, right? How do we get leadership to apply that knowledge and then use it to formulate decisions, then actually take action on it? That's where the value comes. Just the other parts are important, but they're not enough. The value doesn't emerge yet until they actually do something and accomplish something with what you provide. Even if that accomplishment is gaining more knowledge to make better decisions, right? We have to think about, but sometimes it's tough for us because there are some hurdles we face in assessing that impact or even get executives to accept what we provided and find value from it. So again, for my 3 decades of experience, I'll share 5 of those with you. One is what we deliver just doesn't align with any problem to be solved. The executives don't agree that there was any problem to begin with. So our research has to make sure that we're helping to address some kind of a problem statement or some kind of an issue that the company's facing. The second thing is around, did you collaborate enough with the other functional team members that could be affected by your research and by the actions that are needed? Did you talk to sales and marketing, operations and finance and manufacturing, other groups out there to make sure that they're involved and they're understanding your intelligence, and if they have pushback, you're able to address that early. 3 is maybe you make some kind of recommendations for executives to consider, but didn't necessarily link it back to the overall strategic objective strong enough. Hence, they're not always tuned in then if you can't link it back to a key strategy objective that they desire. Number 4 is around, didn't talk about the trade-offs or what has to give. Hey, if you want us to take action on this, what might we have to give up? We only have so much money to do certain initiatives and investments. So if you think we should take this course of action, what might we have to give up? And finally, just not creating that sense of urgency, right? Now, some things, if it's strategic intelligence, it might have a longer roadway. But if you're doing sales intelligence or pricing intelligence, might be a little bit shorter, right? And so we have to create that sense of urgency. And so we have to get over these hurdles to cause them to drive action. So how do we assess the impact? Well, here's the good news. You don't. Your stakeholders do. We need to talk with them to understand how they are managing and measuring those results. And so you're able to say, hey, we deliver this great intelligence for you. What was the impact in your mind to the decision, right? So it all starts with asking some key questions before the project even starts. And many of you on the phone already know a lot of these questions around how you're going to use the information and what's the purpose. But are we asking the questions around what metrics will you assess? How will you know if this project's truly successful? What will this do? Will it help you save time or money? Will it help to win a deal? Will it help to inform a major M&A consideration? What are you trying to accomplish? And then making sure we go back after the project and asking them, so what was the impact? Did you get value out of that? What did it allow you to do? Are you more confident? What decisions did this affect? Now, here's the key thing is to remember is you might not have answers right away from them on that. You might if it's something that's short-term or tactical type of an output, but sometimes it could be weeks or even months before they've made a decision based in part on what you provided. So we have to make sure we take that in consideration, that they might not have immediate input. So you have to put that tickler reminder in your calendar to follow up with them in a month or 2 months or 6 months. So you can still get them to assess the impact of what you delivered. Most of us, most people I've run across in CI don't do that. They're on to the next project. I get it. You're busy. You have 6, 8, 10, 12 projects you're overseeing and orchestrating across the organization. But we have to remember to go back and get that input on those projects. And you have to think about it in 3 ways, right? The timeline, what was the long-term impact and what was the short-term impact? Some things might have recurring benefit. Maybe you help to win a deal and now you're getting recurring revenue, from that account. Well, you still played a small role in getting that recurring revenue because you got the initial account. Right? We have to think again about the level of impact. Is it direct, a specific correlation between what I got you and the benefit we received? Or is it just indirect? And a lot of times it's the indirect component that we face. And excuse me if I look away every couple of seconds. I got a couple of screens up. And so quick question here that I'm seeing. Let me just write something down real quick here. Most common misperception of the impact of measuring the impact. Well, I think that a lot of people think that it's difficult to quantify, right? And it can be at times, but we need to, as best we can, link the qualitative to the quantitative. I think, and again, whether that is cost savings or winning certain deals or revenue growth or risk mitigation, right? But you need your stakeholders' input to help quantify that type of an outcome here, right? And it's not just about the other misconception. It's not just about the big wins. It's the cumulative effect of what we do over a period of time that matters, that we have to remind executives of, so that we're regularly securing advantages for the organization. Let me share a couple of examples. So let's say you're working with the VP of operations or manufacturing, and their entire requirement for their own organization, their own unit, is to think about reducing costs and increasing productivity. That's all they care about. That's what they've been commissioned to do. So all of our deliverables for them have to link back to those 2 metrics. How is what you're giving me going to help me decide or do things that will help us reduce our costs and help us to increase our productivity? Well, one of our clients had done some research on several different competing manufacturing organizations, and they learned of a couple companies that were using some off-the-shelf software to improve their ordering entry system and improve their design and flow of their plant layout and their production capacities, all those issues. And they ultimately realized that they were able to save around 10 to 15% of costs by implementing this technology, and the productivity went up about 17 to 20%. And the VP of manufacturing, I didn't know anything about this. This is great. What is this thing? And they ultimately implemented that, had it customized a bit more, and they started realizing the benefit. Now, the end outcome of that, what does 17% productivity translate to, or what is cost savings translate to? That's the conversation you have to have. But wow, okay, so this project that might have cost you $15,000, $20,000, to do little competitive benchmarking, paid off in a pretty big way. Let's say you're working with the VP of sales and they're trying to win a $10 million deal, and you go do a bunch of research and you try to understand the competitive dynamics. And so you realize you're up against a particular company, and you learn about that company's pricing philosophy, their strategy, getting a sense of their go-to-market approach, and what are their strengths, and what's their unique value proposition and their unique selling points, and what are they saying about us, as a player in the marketplace? What type of a discounting do they typically offer? And you capture all these insights and you share it. And they go out and modify the proposal a little bit, taking that into consideration, and you win the deal, right? Now, of course, you ask the salesperson, why you won the deal, and they go, well, because I'm a great salesperson, or we have this amazing brand, or the product is great, right? Like, oh, okay, but did any of it come from what we provided? Yeah, I'll give you 10% of the credit for it. It's like, okay, you know what? So it was $10 million deal. That's $1 million you're attributing to what the intelligence gave us, right? Okay, terrific. So, and that's one project, one $40,000-$50,000 project had a pretty significant return on the business. So, but you have to get the stakeholders' input on that part of the process as well. Many years ago, and a couple of you on the call have been around CI as long, if not maybe a couple of years longer than I have even. Might remember this individual, Bob Flynn from NutraSuite, and he made a comment that, CI has helped make more good decisions than bad decisions. And it's worth $50 million per year, a combination of revenues gained and revenues not lost. That's how he looked at it. Now, of course, there's one person in the company now, that questions that. And you can imagine who that might be. I know you're thinking of the answer since we're not as engaged as I might normally want in these kind of sessions. But of course, the CFO was like, come on, Bob, what are you smoking crack? $50 million. But if the CEO thinks it's worth $50 million, guess what? It's worth $50 million, right? But sometimes our stakeholders disappear. We can't get their feedback, right? So what if they don't give us input? Well, then it's really important that we take some time to develop credible, reliable, defendable, and believable assumptions. So if we didn't get, sales leadership or sales account manager or anybody to tell us, yeah, I'll give you 10% of the credit, even though you think it's probably 50%, then we have to assume what's reasonable, what's appropriate. And so I want to make sure if you're not right now teamed up with this particular department, you got to get to know somebody in this department to be your best friend. Which department am I talking about? Finance. They understand creating assumptions. They understand how the CFO thinks in terms of ROI. So they can help you with creating some reasonable, believable, defendable assumptions. All that still will show that the investment produced a great return. And let's face it, folks, our CI budgets, they're not massive. Maybe some of the bigger pharma companies, have, $3-5 million types of budgets for CI, but most don't. And so when you're doing these projects, the cost really isn't dramatic compared to the end impact when you're talking about influencing tens of million, if not hundreds of million, if not in some cases, $1 billion decision. So we can have this huge return, but we don't take the time necessarily to show that. We just expect people to think we're adding value. And I see CI firms lose traction and fade away inside their organization or get headcounts adjusted because they're not taking, might be several reasons, but one of them is they're not taking the effort to demonstrate and truly show the value, because you're not an overhead group, and we have to get people to know that. So far, again, you as the CI professional, you have to determine the ultimate impact. You got to get input from the stakeholders to do that. If you don't, and you can't, then you got to create some believable, defendable, reasonable assumptions here. Then become close friends with a financial analyst inside the organization that can help you with that. So now we know what to measure. The client, your stakeholder, tells you that. We know we have to assess the impact. Well, your stakeholder will help you with that. If not, we're going to create some assumptions around that. But then what do we do? Again, think about your annual review. For those of you that still have an annual review, here's the 5 things you're measured on for your performance. I measure them. Man, that's it. Well, if they don't talk to you about it, if they don't report it out, again, who cares? Like publicly held companies, they have all these metrics, return on assets and income statements and balance sheets and all these financial things and all the different line items. And then somebody there puts an annual report together. But if they didn't actually share that with anybody, what's the point? So same thing here. We have to make sure that you now brag a little bit. It's okay to share a little bit about what you're doing and the success that you're having here. Sorry, just popping over here real quick. So quick question around biggest challenge in demonstrating the value. I think it goes back to something I said, and that was that CI value is often indirect. There are definitely times that there is a direct link to what we do, and we have to search for those. We have to, create the story around that. But a lot of times it's indirect, but that's still valuable. But I think the other thing is we have to talk about it in their terms. Stakeholders language, right? Risk mitigation, KPIs, right? However they use the language, we have to use that same language, and that will help you overcome that challenge of getting executives to embrace it. So one thing you can do is create what I call an executive flash report. This is just a very high level, narrative summary of, okay, our research function, whether it's market research, customer research, competitive research, doesn't really matter. This framework I'm describing is flexible to go across all research areas here. But, we had a 2,400% return. It's like 2,400%. Yeah. Because again, our costs aren't that high. So we had a direct impact on $10 million of decisions and value, right? We have had 4 or 5 of our functions now, and stakeholders are from executive team. Great success rate, high scores. We've gone from 2 departments using our services to 5 departments, right? These are different ways you can start to highlight the value that you're creating and the demand that's being created. But here's the kind of the money slide, creating this intelligence summary dashboard. And ROCI, ROCI, I will describe in a moment here. But essentially, make sure you are tracking. Here are all the different projects that we're doing, whether you got a code name or project number or whatever it is. What department did we do it for? Who did we do it for? If you do internal scorecards, if they rate you, capture that. Earlier, we said it's easier to know the cost of what a project took. So, okay, estimate the cost of that engagement. Again, your internal labor, outsourcers, databases, whatever it might be. And then get feedback, whether it had an indirect or direct impact. So some of these you see of these projects, the $400,000 of cost of these particular projects generated impact on $10 million. How do we know that? The stakeholders told us. Right. So I'll give you the example here of the $4 million Salesforce cost avoidance here. Well, we had a client that had a major senior leader who had a huge ego, right? And he had heard a rumbling and a rumor that the competitor was going to put about 100 new salespeople, saturate the market, and hire all these different salespeople. And this person said, well, I'm not going to have that do. I'm going to hire more than that. I'm going to hire my own group of salespeople. And they had the authority to do it, right? We said, hang on a second, cowboy. Let's do a little research and find out what's going on. Well, also we discovered that, yes, the competitor was hiring a bunch of salespeople, but for a product that had nothing to do with our client's offering. So they would have discovered that eventually, but this person was ready to start hiring a recruiting firm, offering signing bonuses and hiring people. Probably would have lost his job at some point, but that cost was avoided because of the research that we did. So we have to be able to make sure we have those conversations with individuals. So here, every dollar you're putting into CI is turning back $24 in return. Why would you cut us? Double it down, I'll get you more return. Now you may say, that's ridiculous. 2,400, it's not even believable, even with the math. Okay, cut that in half. Cut that in half. It's still a 600% return, even if you want to cut that in half. Still generating $3 for every dollar. It's adding value. But we don't take the time enough to consistently demonstrate this, and we need to do that. Right? So again, quick summary of the takeaways here. I just want to check my watch, make sure we're doing okay on time. Communication's key. You got to have that dialogue with your stakeholders here. Don't be intimidated by them just because they're, a senior executive. We need to be able to make sure that We customize those reports to the metrics that they are asking for, that they're going to look at. As Joe Goldberg said many years ago, dear friend of mine who used to run Motorola's CI function, be routinely annoying, right? We got to be routinely annoying with these stakeholders and get their commitment at the start of the project. When we're done, I'm going to come back to you and get your perspective in terms of the impact we really had on your thought process and your decision making, because your input's going to be really important, and get them to commit to that right away. But we're still not done yet, right? We talked about you have to know what to measure. Stakeholders can tell you that. You have to measure it. Your stakeholders are going to help you with that. If not, we're going to create some assumptions around that and work with finance to get clarity. We have to then report that out. So whether it's quarterly, semi-annually, annually, we have to share those findings with people. But we're not done yet. We have to think about the CI culture, right? Some organizations, it took them maybe a decade or longer to ingrain and embed CI into the culture. And then you start to see greater returns because people naturally start to see the value and recognize, the impact. We still have to track it. We can't get complacent. We still have to make sure we're tracking it, right? Patrick Lencioni has a great book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And this is a great one way to kind of think about the culture, right? And this is another reason why sometimes I see executives not always believing what the CI team provides and hence using that in their decision-making, is because they don't always trust what we provide. I've been doing this 30 years. What are you going to tell me that's new? Well, a lot if you listen, right? There's a fear of conflict sometimes by the CI leaders. They want this harmony that ends up being false, but we have to be provocative. We have to be the ones that challenge the status quo and create some shock and awe. And if you're not willing to do that, you might not be in the right seat as a CI leader. 3 is, organizations have a lack of commitment. They talk about wanting to build the capability, but then when's the last time they really invested in it and added staff or added resources and tools and allow you as a CI leader or a practitioner to take things to another level by giving some extra headcount or doing a few other things that allow you to evolve, right? So all these things are ways to think about what the culture is really like to support CI. Dave Gray from Strategizer had this great analogy too about looking at culture as growing your garden. I don't personally garden, but I know folks that do, and the day you want to harvest from that garden, and that's the outcomes of our research. The behaviors are, looking at the actions people take, to get the good or bad harvest. So watering the flowers and the vegetables and getting rid of the rodents and pulling the weeds, all those types of things. So what are you doing to build the CI culture inside your organization? What are the blockers? What are the enablers that you could really concentrate on? And maybe you haven't thought about it much. Maybe that's a key takeaway, as you're going through, listening to this. I think it's really important to do these 6 things, when you're building your CI culture. One is you got to have some C-level champion. They don't have to be in your direct kind of chain of command. They might be in a totally different function, but they get it and they endorse and sanction and believe in CI, and hence they can talk with the peers about the value that you're bringing. We have to keep educating folks. It amazes me that still, 35 years I've been in CI, and it's still, when people hear that, conjures up images of espionage and cloak and dagger, midnight rendezvous and secret handshakes. And we all know it's nothing like that, right? So we have to keep educating people about what it is your function does, what you don't do, whether you're more strategic, whether you're more tactical intelligence, whether you deal with ad hoc work, whether it's ongoing monitoring programs. You have to educate folks about how you can support them. Consider branding your capability. My friend Phil Britton used to run the intelligence group at Best Buy, and he had branded the capability with its own logo. And then of course he went to Ulta, the cosmetic company, and now he's at one of my competitors. But the thing is, he branded the offering within CI. So things got socialized and had the CI logo or stamp of approval, allowed people then, especially leadership, to say, well, I'm not going to look what, Johnny over here sent me because I don't think that's been vetted by the CI team yet. So consider that. Profile your stakeholders, right? Get to know them. What are their preferences? What are they measured on? How do they get their bonus? Because we have to, again, understand what their marching orders are, their objectives, so that what we do links back to those. Especially if they ask a project that you're scratching your head wondering, how does this link back to what they're trying to accomplish? Because it might not. So your advisory role has to kick in, right? Your consultative approach. I wanted you to recognize contributions and success and make sure that you're actually sharing some of those success stories. So better yet, if you get some of your executives to share those success stories, that'd be great, especially at an all hands or a town hall, right? Recognizing some people that have contributing. Going back to Phil, I know at times he would put others right on the title page of a report, others that have contributed. Because let's say you deliver your intelligence report and maybe it's a new leader and they don't really even know you yet. It's like you haven't developed credibility yet with them. But if it says, hey, this is contributed from Susie Smith and Paul Jones and all these other folks, like, okay, wait, I know them. I believe them. They're smart. I will read this, right? So it's always important to make sure other contributors are heard and they get recognized for their contribution to the intelligence report that you delivered. So end of the day, what does this framework look like? Well, it's got to be a triangle because, any good framework is a triangle. So we have to identify the metrics, right? We have to assess the impact and we have to deliver the report. And this is what I call Rocky, play movie theme music now, return on competitive intelligence. Now, some of you might say, yeah, but what you described, I don't know if that's quite ROI. It's like, okay, fine. It's not. It's ROCI. It's a new metric. It doesn't exist. It's like return on equity or return on assets. This is return on competitive intelligence. And this is how we figured it out, right? And we have to be able to be rigorous about this and be patient and let it unfold. And don't just trust me. When I initially, back in 2006, when we trademarked this framework, it got Jan Herring's input. And at the time, he said it was a totally new and practical concept. He thought it should work, just got to give it a try. And here was the key thing, because it offers a flexible, user-oriented way to engage the user and the stakeholder, right? And the producer of the intelligence. That's what ultimately we're trying to do, is foster more conversations with our stakeholders around this throughout the whole process, not just at the end when you're scoping the engagement, during the engagement, and then certainly afterwards. Realizing again that you might not see the benefit of your work for 6, 12, or 18 months later, but we have to go back and ask about it. Otherwise, that project's just sitting there vacant, starving for some type of a benefit. And just because we didn't go back and ask. So while I talked about, the Holy Grail being demonstrating, the value, that's not really the Holy Grail. The real Holy Grail, the only Holy Grail, is you. You're the only ones that can make this happen. You're the only ones that can have the conversations and interact to identify the metrics and be able to assess the impact, be able to share the outputs of those findings at whatever frequency level, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually in your summary report. You have to make that happen. And sometimes we forget, even if we've been in the industry for 10, 15, 20 years, we're just on to the next project. I get it, man. I mean, that's an unfortunate position that we're in as intelligence professionals sometimes. But if we're not hitting the pause button and measuring what we're doing, who the heck will? So I appreciate your input. I'm happy to take a couple questions here that you might have out there. And that you'd like to share. And I hope that you found this valuable as well. We'll make sure to share the recording, but I wanted to give you something quick and easy to think about and to implement along the way. Ruben, any other initial questions out there?
Hey, David, nothing that you haven't already addressed.
Okay, great. I will share another question that I do get addressed often, and that is how do you ultimately align CI with those strategic initiatives then, right? So I think you have to have a lot of conversations to understand the beginning of the year or midpoint in the year. What are the main initiatives so that we could support? CI has to be integrated and not isolated. It's really critical to make sure that we embed our insights into whatever the priorities of the business are. And it could even change per function, per region, per product category, right? So getting to know those different stakeholders, at least the top 4 or 5 that you work with the most, to understand again what it is they're trying to accomplish, so we can link back everything that we do, back to those particular individuals. Getting into the, what's happening in the market, why does it matter? Why should you care? And ultimately, what do we do about it? When you could tie those things in, with your outputs, I think you're going to see the value get recognized along the way. So again, as you leave here today, please take some time to go back and revisit the idea of, are you consistently assessing and measuring and determining the impact of what you're producing? Because if you're not, it's really important to make that part of your process. We talk about scoping out the engagement, doing the research, doing the analysis, writing up the report, QA, delivering the findings. Make sure we add as part of our process. We have to now create our return on competitive intelligence. So even if you don't call it competitive intelligence, that's the motto, and that's the acronym that I use here. Call it whatever you want. Just apply the framework. So thank you again, everybody, so much for your time today. Really appreciate the input, and I hope you all have a great remainder of the day. Take care.
One last question.
Yes. Oh, great.
How do we empower junior CI leads to do this?
Well, it starts by leading by example, so I think we have to walk them through explaining to them the importance of it. So it's not an option. So if they're junior, from day one, they got to be introduced to the framework. They got to be introduced to the mindset of that we have to have engagement with our stakeholders. It can't all be emails and Slack communication. We have to have conversations. But it's showing by example, giving them a pilot. Tell them, on your next project, I want you to work with the stakeholder and you to come up at the end of this with what the value is, right? And then you could guide them, coach them along the way to help them refine that. Listen, folks, you're not going to get it right the first time, and it's not necessarily easy to do, right? Maybe that's sometimes why we don't do it enough. But I've seen so many functions that don't exist anymore because someone's looking, going, well, there's a $500,000 budget. I don't really know what they're providing to us. You got to at all times be ready with that flash report, with that intelligence dashboard to say, listen, we did 22 projects this last quarter alone. It cost us about this amount. And based on the input from stakeholders, this is the direct impact. But on our analysis, this is the indirect impact. So let's be very thoughtful here before you think about reducing our budget. In fact, I would encourage you to double it. So just get the junior folks in there engaged early enough, make them part of the process, have them shadow you when you're doing some of the thinking. And I think that you'll create the right mindset from the start. So again, appreciate the input. If anybody wants a copy of the slides itself, you can email me. Otherwise, next day or two, we'll get the recording out there. All right. So thanks again for your input, everybody, and your questions, and have a great rest of your day. And I hope you found this helpful. Okay. Take care. Bye.